It all started with a drive. A slow one, through what used to be my family's land. Now it's got gates, fancy signs, and a handful of people who think they run the world just because they have matching lawn chairs. As soon as I pulled in, 3 of them rushed toward my truck. Clipboards in hand, phones out, shouting like I just crashed through the gates of the White House. "Sir, you can't be here! This is private property!" I didn't even get a chance to park before one of them, the HOA president, I think, was yelling for someone to call the cops. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed across the road. Neighbors peeked out from behind their windows. An officer walked up, hand on his holster, and asked calmly, "Sir, do you live here?" I smiled. "No, officer. I own here." Everyone went quiet. The HOA president's face froze, clipboard shaking in her hand. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. I reached into my glove box, pulled out the property deed, the original one. The same land her precious private community was sitting on, and as the officer read it over, all I could think was, "They said I didn't belong here." But the truth was, they were living on my land. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. When my grandfather passed away, he left me 1,500 acres of woodland and farmland, the kind of land you feel in your bones. It wasn't just dirt and trees. It was memory, history, and pride, all wrapped into one long horizon. I grew up running through those woods, fishing in the Twin Lakes, and walking the fence line with him every summer. He'd always say, "Land is power, son. Never sell it unless you can't eat otherwise." He meant it too. That land had been in our family for over 100 years. My great-grandfather cleared parts of it by hand. My father planted oaks along the southern border. And my grandfather, he protected every inch of it like it was sacred. So when I came back home after years working overseas, I was expecting peace. That old, familiar quiet. Instead, I got shock, because when I turned down the road that led to our property, I didn't see the open fields or oak trees anymore. I saw houses, rows of them, mansions, cul-de-sacs, streetlights, trimmed hedges, and a massive gated entrance with a shiny metal sign that read, "Welcome to Silver Pines, a Fairway Holdings community." At first, I thought I'd taken the wrong turn. But no, the landmarks were all there. The same old hill, the same 2 lakes in the distance. Only now they had a golf course wrapped around them. It felt like a bad dream. My family's land, our land, had been swallowed whole by concrete. I parked near the gate, got out of my truck, and just stared. A security guard walked over, smiling politely, asking if I was visiting anyone inside. I said, "Yeah, my grandfather." He frowned. "What's the address?" I looked past him at the giant homes and the manicured lawns. "That's the thing," I said slowly. He used to own all of this. He didn't know what to say. Honestly, neither did I. The next morning, I went straight to the county records office. I figured maybe there'd been some mistake, maybe a zoning change, or maybe my dad had leased out part of the land before he passed. But when the clerk pulled up the property file, my heart sank. According to official records, the land had been sold 10 years ago to a developer called Fairway Holdings LLC, sold for a sum that didn't even make sense. I blinked at the document on the screen. "That's impossible," I told the clerk. "I never sold anything. My family didn't sell anything." He shrugged like it wasn't his problem. "Says right here the previous owner signed off. William Jameson." That was my dad's name, but my father had been dead 5 years before that sale ever happened. I asked for copies of everything. The deeds, the signatures, the notary stamps. The moment I saw my dad's name on that contract, my stomach turned. It wasn't just wrong. It was fake. Someone had copied his signature from an old record. The way the loops and strokes matched was too perfect, and notarized it using a fraudulent stamp. The paperwork looked official enough to pass, but to anyone who knew his handwriting, it was obvious. My family's land had been stolen on paper. I left that office with shaking hands. The next day, I called a real estate attorney, a sharp guy named Carter who'd handled a few fraud cases before. When I showed him the documents, he didn't even blink. "Yeah," he said, flipping through the pages. "This is forged. Clean job, though. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing. We dug deeper. Carter tracked the trail, the developer, the company behind it, the titles that spun off into dozens of smaller lots. It turned out Fairway Holdings had sold pieces of my land to individual homeowners, who later formed the Silver Pines Community Association, their shiny HOA. Every sale, every transfer, all of it built on a lie. And the worst part? The county clerk's office had missed the inconsistencies completely because the paperwork looked legitimate. Carter looked at me and said, legally speaking, "You still own every acre of this land." I just stared at him. "You mean those people built homes on property that's still mine?" He nodded slowly. "Every last house, street, and tennis court. Technically, they're all sitting on stolen land. It took us months to confirm everything. Each lot, each deed, all invalid. The law said the original ownership, my family's, never transferred legally." At first, I felt fury. Then disbelief. Then something colder. Determination. I wasn't about to let them erase my family's legacy. One bright morning, I drove down to Silver Pines. I figured I'd start documenting the evidence, photos, boundary markers, all that. I parked near the fountain at the neighborhood's entrance and began taking pictures. Didn't take long before I saw them coming. A small group in matching polo shirts and clipboards. HOA Patrol. Leading the pack was a woman who looked exactly like the kind of person who'd correct your recycling bin placement. Sunglasses, tight ponytail, a face that said authority. She marched up to me and said sharply, "Excuse me, sir? This is private property. You can't take photos here." I lowered my camera and said, "Actually, this is my property." She blinked, then laughed, loud and forced. "Oh, sure it is. And I'm the Queen of England. If you don't leave, we're calling the sheriff." I smiled. "Please do." 15 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The officer stepped out, looked between me and the HOA crowd, and asked what was going on. Karen, I didn't know her name yet, but it fit, pointed at me like I was robbing a bank. "He's trespassing and harassing homeowners." The sheriff asked for my ID. I handed it over along with a copy of the property parcel number. He went back to his car, checked the system, and frowned. Then he walked back and said, Folks, this land's ownership looks complicated. But technically, he's not trespassing." The look on Karen's face was priceless, pure confusion mixed with panic. "That can't be right," she snapped. "We paid good money for these homes." I shrugged. "Maybe you should have checked who you were buying from." They didn't believe me. They couldn't. To them, I was just some guy with a story, but that was fine. The truth was already working its way up the chain. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, a cease and desist from the Silver Pines HOA. Apparently, I was harassing their members by existing. That's when I decided they were going to learn what real ownership meant. Carter and I filed what's called a quiet title action, a legal process to clear up disputed ownership and prove who actually owns the property. The HOA fought back, of course. They claimed every sale was legitimate. They hired expensive lawyers, filled the courthouse with binders of irrelevant paperwork, and even forged new evidence claiming my dad had sold off partial rights before he died. But we had the truth and proof. For nearly 2 years, it dragged on. Local news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Man claims entire subdivision built on his family's land." Neighbors argued online, people took sides. Some thought I was greedy. Others saw it for what it was, justice. Then came the day of the final hearing. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, homeowners, lawyers, and a few familiar HOA faces sitting stiff in the front row. The judge took his time reading through everything. The air was so still you could hear a pen drop. Finally, he looked up and said, clear and steady, "The court finds that the original sale was fraudulent. Ownership of the entire 1,500-acre parcel reverts to Mr. Jameson." For a moment, no one moved. Then whispers rippled through the room. The HOA president went pale. Some homeowners gasped. One woman started crying. And Karen, she just glared at me, eyes full of fire. Outside the courthouse, she ran up to me and shouted, "You're ruining our lives!" I looked at her and said quietly, "You ruined mine when you built over my family's legacy." Then I walked away. I wish I could say I celebrated, but I didn't. It didn't feel like a win. Not yet. What I'd gotten back wasn't just land. It was justice, slow, painful, and necessary. The story wasn't over, but that day, I finally breathed again. That night, I drove out to the edge of the property, past the gates, the fake lake, the cookie-cutter houses, and stood under the same oak tree my grandfather planted decades ago. The stars above were the same ones he used to look at when he said, "Land is power, son." And for the first time in a long time, I finally understood what he meant, because power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience, truth, and the will to stand your ground, literally. When the judge's gavel came down, I thought that would be the end of it. The land was back in my name, the fraud exposed, and justice, finally, on paper. But if there's one thing I learned dealing with people like the Silver Pines HOA, it's that they never know when to quit. You'd think being caught living on stolen land would humble them, maybe bring out an ounce of decency or apology. But no, they doubled down. Within a week, I started getting emails from the HOA president, Douglas, a retired banker who looked like he ironed his golf shirts every morning and probably practiced smiling in the mirror. He accused me of abusing the legal system and harassing honest homeowners. Then came the threats. They'd appeal. They'd take it to the state. They'd go public. It was almost funny. They built their perfect little gated paradise on fraud, lost in court, and still acted like I was the villain. I didn't respond to their emails. Instead, I sent one letter, short, polite, and very clear. A week later, every homeowner in Silver Pines received an envelope in their mailbox. My name was on it. Inside was a simple letter that read, "Dear Silver Pines resident, following the court's ruling, the land beneath your home is legally my property. You have two options. Option A, purchase the land your home sits on at fair market value, $400,000 per lot. Option B, vacate within 90 days. This is not personal. It's business. And a chance to make things right. Sincerely, William Jameson." I thought it was fair. More than fair, actually. I wasn't asking for damages, rent, or back pay. Just the value of the land they'd been enjoying for years without owning. But of course, they saw it differently. 2 days later, the HOA's Facebook group exploded. Screenshots of my letter spread like wildfire. Some called it extortion. Others claimed I was trying to destroy a community. And Douglas? He called a special HOA meeting. They packed the clubhouse that night. About 80 homeowners, all furious, waving copies of my letter in the air. Someone recorded it and posted it online. I watched it later. It was almost theatrical. Douglas stood at the front, his voice trembling with fake confidence. "This man," he said, holding my letter up like a villain's manifesto, "thinks he can bully us out of our homes. But we're not backing down. We're a community." Everyone cheered. Then Karen, yes, that Karen, stood up, pointing at the camera like she was rallying troops. "He can't do this. We paid for our homes. He's just trying to scare us." You could practically hear the echo of denial bouncing off the clubhouse walls. But the truth doesn't care about applause. Their homes, no matter how expensive, were built on land that wasn't theirs. Still, they refused to accept it. A week later, Douglas's lawyers filed a motion, another lawsuit claiming my offer was unreasonable and predatory. That was the moment I realized something. They weren't just fighting for their homes. They were fighting for their pride. And pride, when mixed with arrogance, makes people do stupid things. So I did what my grandfather would have done. I stayed calm. I stayed patient. And I let the law speak louder than emotion. The case hit the courthouse again, but this time it was simpler. The facts were already proven. The judge didn't need to hear emotional speeches or see glossy photos of homes. He just needed to answer one question. Did the HOA or its homeowners have any legal right to occupy land that wasn't theirs? The answer once again was no. The hearing lasted barely 2 days. Their attorneys tried to twist the logic, claiming that equity should let them stay since they were innocent buyers. But the judge shut it down. He looked at Douglas and said, "Ignorance doesn't equal ownership." That line stuck with me. When the ruling came, it was final and brutal. Every property within Silver Pines was officially recognized as mine. Every house, every yard, every street corner, all reverted to the rightful owner. Me. The homeowners had no legal ground left to stand on. Literally, some cried. Others shouted. Karen stormed out mid-hearing, muttering that she'd call the news again. But me? I just sat there quietly, hands folded, thinking about my grandfather's words. Land is power, son. Never sell it unless you can't eat otherwise. Winning felt good, Ussie, but I didn't want to live surrounded by people who despised me. I didn't want their misery to become my daily view. I wanted closure. So when a real estate investment group reached out, curious about Silver Pines, I listened. They saw potential, not in the HOA but in the land itself. Their offer was straightforward. They wanted to buy the entire 1,500 acres, including every structure sitting on it. See, legally, those houses were considered fixtures, permanent parts of my property. That meant if I sold the land, the homes went with it. I didn't have to evict anyone. The new owners would handle that. It was clean. It was legal. It was poetic. After reviewing the terms, I signed the deal. And just like that, I became the man who sold the HOA. When the notices went out, Silver Pines erupted. 30 days. That's all the new owners gave them to leave. The HOA Facebook group, once filled with pool party pictures and rule reminders, turned into chaos, anger, disbelief, panic. They blamed me, of course. Said I was heartless. Said I'd destroyed their lives, but not one of them ever said sorry for building on stolen land. Some chained themselves to the community gate in protest. Others called local news stations, trying to paint me as some sort of villainous tycoon. The sheriff's department had to patrol the neighborhood daily. Trucks moving out were met with shouting and tears. It wasn't pretty. Justice rarely is. Within 2 months, the community that once fined people for unapproved fence colors was gone. The investors wasted no time. They demolished the clubhouse first, then the golf course, then the tennis courts. Soon the noise faded, the fences came down, and the wild began to reclaim what was once taken. When the dust settled, I walked the land again, my land, for the first time in years without trespassing signs or HOA patrols watching me. The silence was different now. Not empty, peaceful. The investors, to their credit, had vision. They wanted to turn Silver Pines into a nature preserve and eco-resort, a place where people could hike, fish, and camp without destroying the land to do it. They paid me a fair sum, enough to rebuild my family's old farmhouse, set up a scholarship in my grandfather's name for agricultural students, and secure the land's protection for good. Standing on that same hill where my grandfather once watched deer graze, I felt something I hadn't felt since he died. Peace. The concrete was gone. The lake sparkled again. The wind moved through the oaks the way it used to. For the first time in decades, the land was alive again. A few months later, I stopped at a small diner in town. I was halfway through my coffee when I saw someone familiar walk in. Douglas, the former HOA president. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in spirit. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. When our eyes met, he hesitated, then walked over. "You destroyed us," he said quietly. I took a sip and looked at him. "No, Douglas. You destroyed yourselves when you thought you could own what wasn't yours." He didn't reply, just nodded like he finally understood. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. Just done. 2 years later, the Silver Pines Nature Preserve opened to the public. Families came to picnic by the lakes, kids fished off the docks, and hikers followed the trails that wound through the trees. At the entrance, a bronze plaque stood beneath an oak tree. It read, "In memory of William Jameson, who taught us that land can be borrowed, but never stolen." Sometimes I'd see a few of the old HOA members drive by slowly, staring through the new gates. They couldn't issue rules here. They couldn't fine anyone for mailbox paint. They couldn't own it, because it was never theirs to begin with. It belonged to the earth again, and to the memory of the man who taught me its worth. People think justice always comes with sirens and shouting. But sometimes, it's quieter than that. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a signature, a deed, and a calm walk through the land your family fought to protect. Some folks play revenge with anger, others play it with lawyers and patience. And in the end, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's perfectly legal.